September 12, 1943. Cherbourg Naval Yards, occupied France. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Hoffman stood on the concrete pier, staring at the sleek wooden hull before him with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. The captured American patrol torpedo boat, designated PT-164 by its former crew, sat secured to the dock like some exotic specimen pulled from an alien ocean. 78 feet of mahogany planking, 3 massive engine housings visible through the shattered deckhouse, and a profile so low and aggressive it seemed designed to slice through water rather than displace it. This should not be possible. No navy builds combat vessels from wood. No military doctrine calls for engines this powerful in such a small hull. Hoffman had commanded destroyers in the Atlantic, hunted convoys off Norway, and studied naval architecture at Kiel. Nothing in his 22 years of service had prepared him for what German engineers were about to discover inside this captured American boat. The PT boat had been taken 3 weeks earlier off the coast of Sicily during the Allied invasion. An Italian shore battery, still loyal to Mussolini's collapsing regime, had scored a lucky hit that disabled the boat's center engine. The crew, unable to outrun approaching German E-boats on 2 engines, had scuttled the vessel in shallow water before escaping in their life raft. German recovery teams salvaged the wreck within 48 hours, towed it to Palermo, then transported it by rail to Cherbourg for detailed examination by Kriegsmarine technical intelligence. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What Hoffman discovered when his team began their inspection would fundamentally challenge everything German naval doctrine taught about small combatant design. The Kriegsmarine built patrol boats from steel. They armored vital spaces. They installed diesel engines designed for reliability and fuel efficiency. This American boat violated every principle of proper naval construction, yet intelligence reports insisted these vessels were devastatingly effective in combat. The first shock came when engineers examined the hull construction. The PT boat's hull was not steel. It was not even aluminum. It was laminated mahogany planking, 2 layers of diagonal planking over longitudinal frames, held together with thousands of bronze screws and marine adhesive. Hoffman ran his hand along the smooth inner surface, feeling the slight ridges where planks joined. The entire combat vessel, designed to operate in war zones, to absorb punishment, to protect its crew, was built from wood like some pleasure yacht. German engineers measured hull thickness with calipers. The bottom planking averaged just 38 millimeters thick. The sides were even thinner, approximately 25 millimeters. For comparison, a German S-boat, the Kriegsmarine's equivalent patrol craft, featured steel plating 8 to 10 millimeters thick in vital areas. The American boat's wooden hull offered virtually no protection against anything larger than rifle-caliber rounds. A single 20mm cannon shell would punch through both sides of the hull. A direct hit from a 40mm gun would likely break the boat's back. The construction seemed almost deliberately fragile. Bronze screws rather than steel bolts held the planking to the frames. Marine glue, not welding, bonded the layers together. The keel was solid mahogany, beautifully shaped but offering no structural redundancy. One well-placed shell could split the keel and fold the entire boat in half. This was not a warship. This was a construction method appropriate for racing yachts, not combat vessels expected to survive in hostile waters. But the real revelation waited in the engine room. When engineers removed the access hatches and looked down into the 3 engine bays, several men actually stepped back in shock. Each bay contained a Packard 4M2500 marine engine, 12 cylinders arranged in a V configuration, supercharged, each engine displacing 2,490 cubic inches, each engine producing 1,200 horsepower at 2,400 revolutions per minute. 3 engines, 3,600 total horsepower, in a 78-foot wooden boat displacing 56 tons fully loaded. The power-to-weight ratio was incomprehensible by German standards. Hoffman ordered complete technical documentation. Engineers photographed every component. They measured cylinder dimensions, examined the supercharger housings, studied the cooling systems, and documented the fuel delivery mechanisms. The Packard engines were masterpieces of American automotive engineering, adapted from aircraft engine technology, built to tolerances that impressed even German technicians trained in precision manufacturing. Each engine weighed approximately 6,100 pounds. The crankshaft alone weighed over 500 pounds, forged from a single billet of steel, machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The connecting rods were aircraft-grade aluminum alloy. The pistons featured modern ring designs that would not have been out of place in a racing car. Everything about these engines screamed performance, speed, and power, with absolutely no consideration given to fuel efficiency or operational economy. The superchargers particularly fascinated German engineers. Each engine featured a gear-driven centrifugal supercharger that forced air into the cylinders at increased pressure, allowing the engine to burn more fuel and produce more power. The supercharger itself was a precision instrument, its impeller spinning at speeds exceeding 20,000 revolutions per minute, its housing machined from solid aluminum forgings. American engineers had taken technology normally reserved for high-performance aircraft and installed it in a patrol boat. The fuel consumption figures, once calculated, seemed almost absurd. At full military power, the three engines consumed approximately 300 gallons of high-octane aviation gasoline per hour. The PT boat's fuel capacity was 3,000 gallons, giving it an operational range of approximately 500 nautical miles at cruising speed, or less than 200 nautical miles at maximum combat speed. By comparison, a German S-boat with diesel engines could operate for 700 nautical miles at cruising speed on less fuel. The Americans had built a vessel that could sprint at 41 knots for perhaps 4 hours before running completely dry. This was not a patrol boat in the German sense. This was a racing machine optimized for brief, violent engagements at extremely high speed, with no expectation of sustained operations or extended patrols. German naval architects, studying the captured boat, struggled to understand the design philosophy. Why accept such limited range? Why use such fuel-hungry engines? Why build from wood when steel was available? Why prioritize speed so absolutely that every other consideration became secondary? The answers would only become clear when German intelligence began compiling combat reports from units that had encountered these boats in action. The story of how America came to build such vessels began years before the war, in the experimental development programs of the 1930s. The United States Navy, observing European developments in fast attack craft, initiated studies on small, high-speed torpedo boats suitable for coastal defense and offensive operations against larger warships. The concept was not new. Torpedo boats had existed since the late 1800s, but previous designs had been relatively slow, limited to 25 or 30 knots, useful primarily for harbor defense. American naval planners, particularly those focused on potential Pacific operations, envisioned something different. They wanted boats capable of extremely high speed, able to close rapidly with enemy warships, launch torpedoes, and escape before the enemy could respond effectively. Speed would be the primary defense. Agility would replace armor. Overwhelming engine power would compensate for lack of protection. The first experimental designs appeared in 1938 when the Navy held a competition for fast patrol boat prototypes. Multiple manufacturers submitted designs. Elco Naval Division, Electric Launch Company, submitted a design based on British motor torpedo boat concepts. Higgins Industries in New Orleans submitted a design emphasizing speed and shallow draft. The Philadelphia Navy Yard developed an in-house design. Each manufacturer took different approaches, but all shared common elements: wooden construction. For lightweight, multiple high-powered gasoline engines, minimal armament to save weight, and maximum emphasis on speed. The Elco design, which would eventually evolve into the PT-164 boat, captured at Sicily, featured a hard chine planing hull that lifted partially out of the water at high speed, reducing drag and increasing top speed. The hull form was adapted from racing boat designs, optimized for smooth water performance rather than rough sea handling. The 77-foot version, first produced in 1941, could achieve speeds exceeding 40 knots with 3 Packard engines installed. When war came in December 1941, PT boat production accelerated dramatically. Elco's factory in Bayonne, New Jersey, began mass-producing boats using assembly line techniques adapted from automobile manufacturing. Higgins Industries in New Orleans produced a competing 78-foot design with slightly different hull lines but similar performance. By the end of 1943, American yards had delivered over 300 PT boats to the Navy, with production continuing at approximately 30 boats per month. These boats deployed throughout the Pacific and Mediterranean theaters. They operated in the Philippines during the desperate defense of Bataan and Corregidor. They evacuated General MacArthur from the Philippines in March 1942, carrying him through Japanese-controlled waters to Mindanao. They fought in the Solomon Islands, attacking Japanese destroyers running supplies to Guadalcanal. They operated in the Aleutians, the Mediterranean, and eventually in the English Channel preparing for D-Day. But the tactical employment of PT boats reflected fundamental differences in American versus German naval thinking. The Kriegsmarine built S-boats, their equivalent fast attack craft, as miniature destroyers. S-boats featured steel hulls for survivability, diesel engines for range and fuel economy, and heavier armament for sustained combat. They were designed to patrol assigned sectors, engage enemy vessels, and maintain station for extended periods. American PT boats, by contrast, were designed as sprinters. They operated from forward bases, sortied for specific missions, executed those missions at maximum speed, and returned to base to refuel and rearm. They were not expected to patrol endlessly. They were expected to strike quickly and vanish. The entire design philosophy emphasized the single violent engagement over sustained operations. This difference became apparent when German intelligence compiled combat reports from units that had engaged PT boats. The pattern was consistent and disturbing from a German perspective. PT boats would approach at high speed, often at night, using their low profile and wooden construction to minimize radar return. They would close to torpedo range, launch their weapons, and accelerate away at speeds no German vessel could match. By the time defending ships could organize a response, the PT boats had vanished into darkness or coastal, waters too shallow for larger vessels to follow. The wooden hull construction, which seemed so fragile to German engineers, actually provided advantages the Kriegsmarine had not anticipated. Wood produced minimal radar return, making the boats difficult to detect electronically. The low profile meant visual detection was equally challenging, especially at night or in rough seas. The shallow draft, just 5 feet fully loaded, allowed PT boats to operate in coastal waters and among islands where deeper drafted opponents could not follow. And then there was the speed, 41 knots, 76 kilometers per hour. This was not the speed of a patrol boat. This was the speed of a destroyer, achieved in a vessel 1/10 the size. When German S-boats, capable of 39 knots maximum, encountered PT boats, they found themselves in the novel position of being unable to catch or escape their opponent. The Americans could choose when to engage and when to withdraw. They held the initiative entirely. The combat reports from Sicily, where PT 164 had been operating before its capture, illustrated this tactical advantage with brutal clarity. On the night of July 18, 1943, 6 PT boats from Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron, 15 intercepted an Italian convoy attempting to evacuate troops from Sicily to the mainland. The convoy consisted of 2 destroyers, 4 armed trawlers, and 8 landing craft. It should have been more than adequate to defend against small attack craft. The PT boats approached in 2 groups of 3, using the Sicilian coastline to mask their radar signature. At 2,000 yards range, they increased to maximum speed and separated, attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. The Italian destroyers opened fire with their main batteries, but hitting small, fast-moving targets in darkness proved nearly impossible. The PT boats launched 16 torpedoes in under 3 minutes. 4 torpedoes struck landing craft, sinking 3 and damaging a 4th. 1 torpedo struck an armed trawler, breaking its keel. The PT boats then withdrew at full speed, evading pursuit by the destroyers. The entire engagement lasted less than 12 minutes from first contact to final withdrawal. The PT boats suffered no damage. They returned to base, refueled, rearmed, and were ready for operations again within 6 hours. This was the tactical model. American planners had envisioned swift, violent raids executed by boats too fast to catch and too small to hit effectively at night. German naval officers studying these reports recognized they faced a doctrinal challenge as much as a technological one. The Kriegsmarine had designed its small combatants for different purposes. S-boats were intended to operate in the North Sea and Baltic, interdicting Allied coastal convoys, laying mines, and conducting reconnaissance. They needed range to reach distant patrol areas. They needed seakeeping ability to handle rough, northern waters. They needed diesel engines because high-octane aviation gasoline was scarce in Germany and needed for aircraft. American PT boats operated in fundamentally different conditions. In the Pacific, they worked from island bases, conducting short-range strikes against Japanese shipping. In the Mediterranean, they operated from North African and Sicilian ports, striking at Axis supply routes. They had access to abundant aviation fuel. They operated primarily at night when their speed advantage was most pronounced. They relied on shore-based support for maintenance and repair, rather than attempting sustained independent operations. The 3,600 horsepower installed in PT 164 represented a design philosophy. The Kriegsmarine had never seriously considered that speed, pursued absolutely without compromise, could be a form of protection more effective than armor plate. That the ability to dictate engagement terms, to strike and escape at will, might outweigh the advantages of sustained firepower and endurance. The costs became apparent as German engineers attempted to operate the captured PT boat under controlled conditions. Hoffman assembled a crew of experienced S-boat personnel, men familiar with high-speed craft operations, and prepared for sea trials in the protected waters off Cherbourg. The goal was to evaluate the boat's performance, test its systems, and understand how American crews managed such a complex machine in combat conditions. The first challenge was fuel. The Packard engines required 100-octane aviation gasoline, the same fuel used in fighter aircraft. Germany's fuel situation in September 1943 was already critical. Aviation fuel was strictly rationed, prioritized for the Luftwaffe's desperate defense of the Reich. Diverting sufficient fuel to operate a captured American boat required special authorization from the Oberkommando der Kriegsmarine. Hoffman eventually secured 5,000 litres, enough for approximately 15 hours of operation at various power settings. The second challenge was maintenance. American PT boats required constant attention from trained mechanics. The Packard engines, built to extremely tight tolerances, demanded precise maintenance procedures. Oil had to be changed every 50 hours of operation. Spark plugs required inspection every 25 hours. The supercharger bearings needed lubrication according to strict schedules. Fuel filters had to be cleaned regularly to prevent contamination from reaching the carburetors. The cooling systems required specific mixtures of water and antifreeze maintained at exact concentrations. German mechanics, accustomed to the simpler maintenance requirements of diesel engines, found the Packard engines intimidating. The captured boat came with partial technical documentation, instruction manuals taken from the wreckage, but these were in English and required translation. Simple procedures became complex and without proper manuals. The learning curve was steep and consumed weeks before Hoffman felt confident his crew could operate the boat safely. The sea trials finally began on October 4, 1943. The PT boat left Cherbourg harbour under calm conditions, pushed by a single engine at low power. The boat handled easily at displacement speeds, responding well to helm inputs, tracking straight despite its light weight. Nothing unusual occurred until Hoffman ordered increased speed. At 15 knots, still running on one engine, the boat began to change character. The bow lifted slightly as the hull started transitioning from displacement mode to planing mode. At 20 knots, with two engines engaged, the transformation became dramatic. The bow rose sharply, the stern squatted, and suddenly the hull lifted onto its planing surfaces. The ride smoothed out. The engine noise changed pitch as the propellers bit into less disturbed water. The boat seemed to leap forward with each incremental throttle increase. At 30 knots, running on all three engines at moderate power, the PT boat was skimming across the surface like a skipped stone. The wooden hull transmitted every wave impact directly to the crew. The ride was harsh, violent, punishing. But the speed was intoxicating. The boat covered distance at rates German S-boats could only match in absolute calm conditions. The speedometer needle climbed past 35 knots, approaching 40 knots, and still the engines had power in reserve. Hoffman ordered full military power. The superchargers engaged with audible whines. The engines roared. Fuel consumption increased to catastrophic rates, and the PT boat accelerated to 41 knots, matching the specifications American intelligence had claimed. At this speed, the boat was barely controllable. Steering inputs had to be smooth and gradual. Sharp turns would capsize the vessel or rip the hull apart. The slightest wave sent the boat airborne, crashing back down with impacts that threatened structural damage. But the speed was undeniable. This wooden boat, powered by 3 gasoline engines, could outrun every surface combatant in the Kriegsmarine except perhaps another PT boat. The tactical implications were staggering. If American forces deployed these boats in sufficient numbers, they could dominate coastal waters through sheer speed and numbers. They could strike targets and escape before defensive forces could react. They could choose when and where to fight, holding the initiative completely. The fuel consumption at full power shocked even engineers who had calculated it beforehand. The 3 engines consumed fuel so rapidly that the gauge needles visibly dropped during the high-speed run. After just 45 minutes at various speeds, including 10 minutes at maximum power, the PT boat had consumed over 800 litres of fuel. Extrapolating those figures confirmed the Americans had built a vessel with an operational radius, measured in hours rather than days. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. But the most disturbing discovery came when German engineers examined the boat's survivability features, or rather, the complete absence of survivability features. The fuel tanks were unarmoured aluminum, positioned low in the hull for stability, but offering zero protection from combat damage. The engines had no armour shielding. The crew spaces had no protective plating. The helm station featured only a thin plywood console. The entire boat was designed with the assumption that speed would prevent hits, making armour unnecessary. This philosophy stood in complete opposition to German naval doctrine. S-boats featured armoured engine rooms, protected helm positions, and redundant systems designed to keep the boat fighting even after sustaining damage. German designers assumed their boats would be hit and built in protection accordingly. American designers assumed their boats would not be hit and eliminated protection entirely to maximize speed. The difference reflected fundamentally different answers to the same question. How does a small combat vessel survive in hostile waters? The Germans answered with armor, structural strength, and damage control. The Americans answered with speed, agility, and the ability to escape before being hit. Both approaches had merit within their respective operational contexts, but the American approach depended entirely on maintaining superior speed. German intelligence had obtained crew interviews from Italian forces who had captured American PT boat personnel during earlier operations. These interviews revealed the psychological dimension of PT boat operations. American crews operated with the understanding that their boat could not survive serious hits. A single 20mm shell through the engine room would likely ignite fuel lines and create catastrophic fires. A 40mm hit could crack the wooden hull and sink the boat in minutes. Therefore, American tactics emphasized never being in a position where the enemy could achieve accurate fire. PT boats attacked at night when visual targeting was difficult. They used smoke generators to obscure their position once detected. They operated in groups, approaching from multiple directions to divide defensive fire. They relied on torpedoes launched from long range rather than close-in gun duels. Every tactical decision reflected the boat's fragility and the crew's vulnerability. Korvettenkapitän Ernst Müller, commander of the 5th S-boat flotilla and one of the Kriegsmarine's most experienced small craft officers, visited Cherbourg in late October to examine the captured PT boat personally. His assessment, filed in a report dated November 2, 1943, provided the most comprehensive German analysis of American PT boat doctrine. Müller noted that the PT boat represented a complete inversion of accepted naval architecture principles. Where German designers added weight to increase survivability, Americans eliminated weight to increase speed. Where German doctrine emphasized sustained operations, American doctrine emphasized brief, violent actions. Where German training focused on damage control and fighting wounded vessels, American training focused on prevention through speed and agility. The report acknowledged that within their operational parameters, PT boats were highly effective. In the confined waters of the Mediterranean, among the islands of the Pacific, operating from forward bases with abundant fuel supplies, the boats performed exactly as designed. They struck convoys, harassed larger warships, conducted reconnaissance, and evacuated personnel from contested areas. Their speed made them difficult targets. Their wooden construction minimized radar detection. Their shallow draft allowed operations in waters where larger vessels could not follow. But Müller also identified critical vulnerabilities. PT boats required extensive shore support. They needed mechanics, spare parts, fuel, and torpedoes delivered to forward bases. Destroy the bases, and the boats became useless. They could not operate independently for extended periods. They could not patrol vast ocean areas. They were fundamentally tied to fixed infrastructure in a way that S-boats, with their longer range and diesel engines, were not. Most critically, PT boats were extremely vulnerable in daylight operations or when caught by surprise. Multiple combat reports from the Mediterranean documented PT boats destroyed by aircraft, by E-boats that achieved surprise, or by shore batteries that caught them in restricted waters. The wooden hulls burned readily when hit by incendiary ammunition. The gasoline engines exploded when punctured. Crew casualties were typically total when a PT boat was destroyed because there was no armoured refuge, no protected space where men could survive hits that would sink the boat. This casualty pattern disturbed German officers reviewing the reports. American naval doctrine apparently accepted the total loss of crews as an acceptable risk in exchange for the tactical advantages PT boats provided. This was not callousness. American forces invested heavily in rescue operations, deployed air-sea rescue services extensively, and prioritized recovering downed aircrews and shipwrecked sailors. But the PT boat design philosophy inherently accepted that crews would die if their boats were hit, gambling that speed would prevent hits from occurring. The captured boat's crew spaces reinforced this grim calculus. The helm station was completely exposed. The forward gun position, where a gunner operated the 37mm or 40mm cannon, had no shield, no protection whatsoever. The torpedo tubes were operated from exposed deck positions. The aftergun mount similarly offered no cover. Only the engine room had any overhead protection, and that was simply to keep spray and rain off the engines, not to stop shells. German engineers calculated that a 20mm cannon shell striking anywhere along the hull would penetrate both sides, likely killing anyone in its path. The wooden construction provided no resistance to modern ammunition. A sustained burst from an aircraft's machine guns would riddle the hull, igniting fuel tanks and causing catastrophic fires. The boat would become a death trap within seconds of taking fire. Yet American crews volunteered for PT boat duty. They competed for assignments to these squadrons. They took pride in operating the boats and developed aggressive tactical doctrines that maximized their advantages. Intelligence reports included intercepted American correspondence from PT boat officers, expressing enthusiasm for their assignments, describing night attacks against Japanese destroyers, recounting high-speed escapes from superior forces. The psychological profile of PT boat crews fascinated German intelligence analysts. These were not fatalistic warriors resigned to death. These were young men, average age 23, who believed their speed and skill would keep them alive. They trusted their boats despite understanding the dangers. They developed exceptional boat handling skills, learning to operate at maximum speed in darkness, navigating by instinct and experience through waters studded with reefs and obstacles. Training reports captured from American bases revealed the intensity of PT boat crew preparation. Officers attended specialized schools, learning navigation, torpedo tactics, and small boat handling. Engine mechanics trained for months on Packard engines before deploying. Crews practiced night navigation, recognition drills, and emergency procedures until reactions became automatic. The Americans invested heavily in preparing men to operate these fragile boats effectively. Employment reflected careful thought about maximizing advantages while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. PT boats operated in squadrons of 4 to 8 boats, attacking in coordinated groups that divided enemy attention. They approached from multiple directions simultaneously, launched torpedoes rapidly, and withdrew at high speed before defensive fire could concentrate on individual boats. The tactics were sophisticated, practiced extensively, and executed with precision that impressed even German officers who studied the combat reports. One engagement particularly highlighted American tactical skill. On August 1, 1943, in Blackett Strait in the Solomon Islands, a group of PT boats engaged the Tokyo Express, a Japanese destroyer run delivering supplies to Guadalcanal. Among the boats was PT 109, commanded by Lieutenant Junior Grade John F. Kennedy. During the engagement, the Japanese destroyer Amagiri rammed PT 109 inches Darkness, cutting the boat in half and killing 2 crew members instantly. The 11 survivors, including Kennedy, clung to the wreckage until morning, then swam 3 miles to a small island. Kennedy towed a severely burned crew member by holding the man's life jacket strap in his teeth while swimming. The crew survived on the island for 6 days before being rescued by coast watchers and friendly islanders. The incident demonstrated both the vulnerability of PT boats when caught by surprise and the extraordinary determination of American crews to survive. German intelligence obtained reports of this engagement through signals intercepts and subsequent prisoner interrogations. The incident confirmed German assessments that PT boats could be destroyed by ramming, a tactic that larger warships could employ if they could close with the boats. But it also demonstrated that American crews would not be easily defeated even in desperate circumstances. The determination to survive, to continue fighting, to rescue wounded comrades, reflected a cultural approach to warfare that German analysts found difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. The industrial dimension of PT boat production revealed another fundamental difference between American and German approaches to warfare. By November 1943, American shipyards had delivered over 300 PT boats to the Navy. Production continued at rates exceeding 30 boats per month. Elco's Bayonne facility operated 3 shifts, 24 hours per day, assembling boats using techniques adapted from automobile manufacturing. Higgins Industries in New Orleans similarly mass-produced their design variant. This production scale was possible because PT boats used wooden construction and gasoline engines, both available from civilian industries. Mahogany came from lumber suppliers. Bronze fittings came from foundries serving commercial shipbuilding. The Packard engines were modified versions of engines built for luxury automobiles. America could produce PT boats without competing for scarce strategic materials needed for destroyers, cruisers, and battleships. Germany could not replicate this approach. S-boat construction required steel plating, a strategic material needed for submarines, destroyers, and merchant ships. The Kriegsmarine's construction priorities emphasized U-boats above all else. Surface combatants competed for the same materials, the same shipyard capacity, and the same skilled workers. S-boat production remained limited throughout the war, never exceeding the scale of American PT boat production. The Packard engines represented another insurmountable advantage. America's automobile industry could produce high-performance gasoline engines in quantities Germany could not match. Packard built thousands of marine engines for PT boats while simultaneously producing aircraft engines for bombers. The same Detroit factories that built civilian automobiles before the war converted to military production without losing their core engineering expertise or manufacturing capacity. German industry, already strained by competing military demands, could not suddenly develop equivalent marine engines. The diesel engines used in S-boats were excellent designs, fuel-efficient and reliable, but they could not produce the power-to-weight ratios that Packard achieved with supercharged gasoline engines. Germany lacked the industrial capacity, the raw materials, and the fuel supplies to replicate American PT boat performance, even if German designers had wanted to pursue that approach. Hoffman's final report on the captured PT boat, submitted to Naval Headquarters in Berlin on November 15, 1943, acknowledged these realities with unusual candor for a German military document. The report detailed the boat's specifications, described its performance during sea trials, and analyzed its tactical employment. But the conclusion was sobering. The American PT boat represents a weapons system we cannot duplicate and should not attempt to counter directly. Its advantages derive from industrial capacity, resource availability, and operational doctrine that are fundamentally different from our own. The report recommended that German forces encountering PT boats should avoid night engagements where the American speed advantage was most pronounced, employ aircraft against PT boat bases rather than attempting to engage the boats at sea, and use mines and shore batteries to restrict the waters where PT boats could operate effectively. These were defensive recommendations, acknowledging that the Kriegsmarine could not match American capabilities in this particular domain. But the report's most significant conclusion addressed the broader strategic question these boats represented. American forces were building weapons systems based on the assumption of abundant resources, unlimited fuel, and industrial capacity that could replace losses indefinitely. German forces built weapons based on the assumption of scarce resources, limited fuel, and irreplaceable manufacturing capacity. The PT boat, with its fuel-hungry engines and wooden construction, was a weapon only America could afford to field in large numbers. This realization carried implications far beyond patrol boat design. It suggested that American industrial mobilization had reached scales where the United States could pursue tactical approaches Germany could not counter. If America could build hundreds of PT boats while simultaneously building thousands of aircraft, hundreds of destroyers, and dozens of aircraft carriers, then the arithmetic of industrial warfare had already determined the war's outcome. German officers studying the captured PT boat in late 1943 were witnessing evidence of American material superiority made tangible. The 3,600 horsepower installed in a 78-foot wooden boat represented resources used lavishly, without the desperate calculations of scarcity that governed German production. Every technical decision in the PT boat's design reflected confidence in abundant supplies of fuel, of engines, of materials, of everything needed to wage war at scales Germany could not match. The psychological impact on German naval officers cannot be overstated. These were men trained to believe in German technological superiority, in the qualitative advantages of German engineering. They served in a navy that had pioneered submarine warfare, developed advanced torpedo technology, and built some of the world's most sophisticated warships. Yet here was an American boat, built from wood by civilian contractors using automobile engines that could outperform German designs in its intended role. The captured boat remained at Cherbourg through the winter of 1943 into 1944, used primarily for training purposes. German crews practiced boat handling, learning techniques American crews employed. Intelligence officers brought captured documents to the boat, comparing technical manuals with the actual hardware. Engineers dismantled one of the Packard engines completely, documenting every component, measuring tolerances, analysing materials. But the boat never saw combat again under German control. The fuel requirements made operational use impractical. The maintenance demands exceeded what German mechanics could sustain. The boat represented a curiosity, a valuable intelligence asset, but not a weapon the Kriegsmarine could actually employ. In June 1944, when Allied forces invaded Normandy, the PT boat was among hundreds of vessels scuttled or destroyed, as German forces evacuated Cherbourg. The boat that had revealed so much about American capabilities ended its existence in the same harbour where German engineers had first examined it with such fascination. The legacy of PT boat operations extended far beyond their direct combat effectiveness. These boats represented a tactical philosophy that emphasized speed and aggression over protection and endurance. They demonstrated that wooden construction could produce viable combat vessels when properly designed. They showed that gasoline engines, despite their fuel consumption and fire hazards, could provide performance advantages that outweighed their disadvantages in specific operational contexts. Most importantly, PT boats validated an approach to warfare based on accepting calculated risks in exchange for tactical advantages. American Doctrine was willing to put crews in vulnerable boats because those boats could accomplish missions impossible for more heavily protected craft. The speed to intercept enemy forces, the ability to operate in shallow waters, the capacity to strike and escape before being engaged, all these capabilities justified the risks American crews accepted. German Doctrine reached different conclusions from different premises. With limited industrial capacity, scarce fuel supplies, and irreplaceable trained crews, the Kriegsmarine could not afford weapons that required lavish resource expenditure. German boats needed to survive damage, operate independently for extended periods, and remain combat effective even when wounded. These requirements demanded different design choices that led to different capabilities. Neither approach was objectively superior. Both reflected rational responses to different strategic circumstances. But by late 1943, when Hoffman examined PT 164 at Cherbourg, the strategic circumstances were shifting decisively in America's favor. The nation with resources to build fuel-hungry speedboats by the hundreds, while simultaneously waging global war, was demonstrating advantages that no amount of German technical sophistication could overcome. The final irony was that PT boats, despite their impressive performance and aggressive doctrine, never achieved the decisive strategic impact their advocates hoped for. They sank relatively few major warships. Their torpedo attacks, while spectacular when successful, suffered from low hit rates due to the technical limitations of American torpedoes early in the war. Many of their most important contributions were peripheral missions, evacuating personnel, conducting reconnaissance, harassing enemy logistics. But as symbols of American industrial might and tactical innovation, PT boats achieved something perhaps more valuable. They demonstrated to friends and enemies alike that America could afford to pursue specialized capabilities at scales other nations found impossible. If the United States could build hundreds of wooden speedboats powered by 3,600 horsepower engines, burning fuel at catastrophic rates, designed for brief, violent missions, what couldn't they build? That question haunted German planners in the war's final years. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.